All right. Well, thank you, everyone, and welcome. I'm Anne-Marie Baracki with Midtown Detroit Inc., one of the lead members working with the DIA on the DIA Plaza Midtown Cultural Connections project. We want to just get a couple quick thank yous out there to all of our jurors that are here tonight. Their names are listed in the program. So if you haven't picked up a copy, there are programs outside the lecture hall. We'd like to thank members of our steering committee that are here as well, along with our funders, William Davidson Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation, and also we'd like to thank the Boston Consulting Group for their support on this project. We're also very thankful that you are all here for the next 90 minutes. I will be serving as the facilitator, and essentially what that means is I'm the timekeeper. As many of you are aware, the goals of this design competition are twofold: to reimagine the exterior grounds of the DIA, making them highly visible, welcoming, flexible, and functional to support year-round programming, and two, to explore elements from the DIA design to help connect all of the institutions within the arts and cultural district to encourage walkability, improve wayfinding, parking, et cetera, while engaging the community throughout the entire design process. So over the next 2 days, we will be hearing the 8 semifinalist teams and their partners explain why they believe they are the best suited to lead these efforts and share their initial ideas for how they hope to approach this design challenge. So a little bit of housekeeping here. Each team will have 45 minutes to introduce their members and present their credentials. The Q&A will immediately follow and run for 35 minutes. Our jurors will have first opportunity to ask questions, followed by our steering committee members, and then it will be opened up to the audience for the remainder of the time. The last 10 minutes will be reserved for final statements from our design team. So during this time, we ask all of you to do the following. Please mute or turn off your cell phones. If you are presenting or would like to ask a question, we will have microphones that you can come up and ask. Please speak directly into the microphone so that you can be heard. Part of the reason why is we are live streaming this on Facebook, and we are also video recording this, and we'll have these presentations archived on our project website at midtownculturalconnections.com. We also ask you to share your impressions of each team. There were comment cards in your program. Please fill out your comments on this and share it with us, or you can leave it at the registration desk outside of the lecture hall. If any of you in the audience have questions that we cannot fit into the Q&A session, please know that we do want to hear from you. Connect with one of the project management team members after the presentation, or use the comment card and let us know how to get in touch with you. After the conclusion of this week, 3 teams will be selected to advance by our jury, as Salvador said. So look for a public announcement of those teams in July. And now to the fun part. It is my pleasure to turn the floor over to UNStudio.
Thank you very much. We're very happy for the invitation. We're very honored to be over here with our team. We'd like to start with a small introduction of everybody that is sitting over here. I'm Frans van Vuren. I'm one of the directors of UNStudio and from Amsterdam.
I guess I'll take this one. Okay. My name is Malena Stopik. I'm an architect and an associate at UNStudio in Amsterdam.
Michael Guthrie, I'm a principal with UNStudio in the Detroit area.
Roderick Wiley with Surface Design. We're landscape architects based in San Francisco.
Sherry Dobbin, and I'm here with Future City, which is an agency based in London, but yes, I am American.
Okay, we prepared a little bit with a standing presentation, but since the jury is so close to us, we thought let's stay in our seats. It's not that confronting. Yes, we want to start with telling you what we interpreted from the brief that we received, of course, in start with our expression of interest, the way we described how we would approach this project. And by visiting Detroit, it became more clear what the question of the client is and what the challenges are that we're facing. What we as architects deal with generally is, of course, what kind of identity is a client looking for, what kind of branding, what kind of reasons are behind any request to develop or redevelop or transform an area that is existing or something that we build new. We, as UNStudio, do a lot of projects all around the world, but the question and the client is most important, and interpreting that and talking about that question and anticipating on that question is the most important. You see an image over here of the Mercedes-Benz Museum that we did in Stuttgart around 2006. And the Mercedes-Benz Museum is a museum of cars. So in a way it's low culture, but Mercedes-Benz, of course, high culture in the way of displaying their history and their products. What is nice, it's a low threshold for people to enter. Access is quite economic, let's say. It's not free. And you make a tour through the museum, a short one or a long one. The identity of the building has to do with the location where it's set, and that's along the highways of Stuttgart. So it has the dynamics of the way you actually enter the city and get to the place to go to the museum. What we see over here is a museum with an external theater, and we did design this within the back of our mind that it will be utilized now and then, but the community that takes care of the museum as well as organizes events, to our surprise, brought in a lot of groups over here and events that made the museum as a backdrop of something different. And of course, that's what we're looking for. The museum is closed doors, but is always apparent in the night or in the cityscape. To create a memorable identity takes a lot of effort, takes a lot of visioning and conversation and listening to everybody involved, all the stakeholders, but also ourselves as designers. We're used to this. It's something that we like to develop together with everybody. We are believing kind of a horizontal organization. So we are lead architect of this project, but we actually invite everybody to join us in thinking about what could be the first steps, what could be the outlook for a longer period, and what is the end result that we're aiming for. The site is challenging, as said. We visited yesterday. Actually, for Milena and me, it's our first visit to Detroit, so that was a very welcome start with our journey over here. And of course, the location is bound by borders, let's say, the borders of the buildings, the institutions themselves, which are quite harsh, the facades that not always are inviting. It's also sometimes difficult to find the entrances of all the buildings, and sometimes they're locked. But especially the public space, and the public space is divided by gates, by roads, by wayfinding that sometimes don't make sense. So it's really something that we have to sink our teeth in and see what do we want to do with it and how do we make it more accessible and friendly for everybody to get more footfall. This is an image of the Burnham Pavilion in Chicago that we did a couple of years ago. And the Burnham Pavilion was set in a park area for a temporary period of time. And the idea is that the community that would visit it would get a different view on the city, would be invited to talk about the city and the development of it, and at the same time would confront each other and talk with each other in a pleasant, interesting environment. So that's one of our experiences, and actually it worked out quite well. What we propose to do for this particular question, we think, is to add elements in the development over time. So not come up with a holistic view in the beginning, but phased introduction. And by phased introduction of different moments, triggers, let's say, but also comfort and secure items or objects that might get to different kind of communication of the neighborhood and the people visiting and the stakeholders, we can get to a better idea of what the long-term outlook might be. Sorry. And this is what we're looking at. We visited it yesterday, Woodward artery, let's say, a big barrier, we think, in between the planned zones. And that's going to be quite a challenge because it's not only, of course, how we move about in the area as pedestrians, maybe as people on bicycle. I mean, we're coming from the Netherlands. We like to bicycle a lot, and we see that also happening more in Detroit, slowly, I think. But especially, of course, what is also the experience from the car. I mean, everybody has its own automobile over here, and we cannot deny that. We want to keep it accessible as easy as possible, but also get to an identity that is more recognizable, not only by the two big institutions of the public library as well as the DIA, but in a more coherent kind of setting. And that's what we're going to research in the coming days. Milena.
Too many microphones. Good morning, everyone. Thank you again for having us here. Very excited to be in Detroit for the first time. So I'd like to take the time to introduce a little bit our team, but also specifically UNStudio and how we work. And in a sense, because we are the ones who have gathered the team and prepared the RFP and really thought carefully about who we would like to have, what kind of experts we would like to have, and what kind of disciplines. So having Surface Forum as our landscape architects and Inform and certainly Future City with Sherry and Atelier 10. In a way, we have been sort of tracing each other's work over the years and been very interested in kind of following each other's work. And we're just very grateful to have this project to put us all together and to work on it. So I think the way that this team will function also speaks about the way UNStudio performs internally. So we are very much, as Franz was mentioning, a kind of a horizontal network of experts and in both design, architectural design, urban design, et cetera. So we have a number of disciplines in the office. And we really like to work kind of cross-disciplinary, but also we really appreciate the presence of other experts and consultants on our team. So it's not just about the architecture and it's not just about the design, but it's also very much about the engineering behind it. It's very much about the cultural thinking behind it. And in a way, this team presents exactly the way that we would like to work. So we are also a very diverse team in-house. We also very much like to kind of nurture an internal conversation. So UNStudio has its own lecture and sort of little mini symposium series a couple times per year. Through our founding partners, Ben and Caroline, who are also very much involved in the academia, both across the seas as well as within the Netherlands. We are, as I said, very much interested in kind of having a high tonal conversation within our office. And in that sense, we use that to kind of keep ourselves on our toes as to what is relevant in the architectural world and also what is kind of current and to be able to predict the future. And so in that sense, we're kind of future-oriented, but very much always with the human in mind and with the human experience in mind. So we work internationally. Apart from the office in Amsterdam, we also have an office in Hong Kong and in Shanghai. I think we're working in nearly 30 countries around the world and certainly have people coming from all over the world to work with us. So I think we're about 35 nationalities at the moment, and it keeps on growing. I myself am from Serbia. France is one of the very few Dutch people in the office, but it's actually very international. We have 200 in Amsterdam and growing, and about 40 in Shanghai and another about 10 in Hong Kong. So this would be, apart from the Burnham Pavilion and one more pavilion in Battery Park in New York, this would be one of our first projects in the States on this scale, certainly. And I think that really sets a tone for us, and that certainly motivates our presence. There's been a huge interest from us in the American urban space, and in that sense, this is a really unique opportunity to have that intervention and to place our thoughts here, and also to be able to bring some of our thinking and experience and kind of stir it up and maybe indicate what the future of that urban space might be. So in terms of how we work and how do you put Sherry from London, them from Detroit, and from San Francisco, and us from Amsterdam. This is also something that about 30 years of experience within UNStudio, we've kind of crafted that process, which very much includes welcoming people for workshops, for one-to-one conversations in Amsterdam. But at the same time, as we've just come here for these few days, we're always happy to travel, and that's very much a part of our ethos of working. So we love to be able to come here. We love this face-to-face. We love meeting our collaborators, and certainly it just helps nurture our chemistry and the way that things are unfolding, and we really do believe that this is the path towards very innovative solutions. So as I mentioned, UNStudio just operates on a number of scales, and we do urban design, we do interiors, we do product design, as well as, of course, architecture. And in that sense, I'm involved with sort of urban projects within UNStudio, but I also do architectural projects, and we like that mix of our architectural/urban design background that kind of covers that part of the team from our side. In terms of the urban design, we really love to use technologies and tools to help us inform the design, to help us do the research, and to really make informed decisions rather than just intuitive decisions only. Even though, of course, design is always a kind of a mix of that research and intuition, but we very much like to embed technology in how we think. The project on the right, for example, kind of imagines a future scenario whereby we are sort of storing parking solutions in concentrated places around the city, opening up the urban space to the pedestrian, and kind of reimagining how maybe in 20 years we might think about the car dynamic happening in Amsterdam. At the same time, we always keep the human at the center of the experience and very much oriented towards sort of a scaled space, a very human-centric space. And maybe this is something that we bring living in Amsterdam and being in a space which is actually very scaled in that sense. So we mostly have low-rise buildings, we mostly have very narrow streets, and I think in that sense that helps us also to understand how to translate some of these kind of design techniques into the solutions that we also propose. I'd want to briefly talk about a large urban development just to illustrate some of the ways that we think about design. This is our station for Arnhem Central Station in a city called Arnhem in the Netherlands. And basically it's a kind of confluence of a number of different flows. You have trains, trams, you have buses, you have people coming in, bikes coming in, etc. So we've done extensive research to first of all understand how to sort of combine these flows and how to make them all work and how to express that through architecture. And number one, how to actually create the place for the people and how to make that station and that big infrastructural node and all the development around it really a kind of a resuscitator in a way for the city, which the intent of the project actually was. And internally, we've kind of solved it with this very identifiable twist. But then after the 20 years of the development of the station and all the different buildings around it that are associated, actually, we just kind of let the people occupy the space. And these are just different images that we kind of track and collect over Instagram of what people are posting. But basically, people appropriate the space, and we really love that because, you know, you could just say, well, this is just a station or it's just a piece of architecture. But it actually became so much more than that. It became a place where bikers come or where skaters come or where people kind of gather and plan performances and dances and piano recitals, etc. So it just became something that people begin to own. And we very much love creating these kinds of spaces that of course, we direct the design, but then we take that moment to kind of step away and leave the people to repurpose it. And in a way, aside from talking about our work, I also wanted to shed light on one more thing about Amsterdam and where we come from. And this is one of the main squares in Amsterdam. It's called the Leidse Square, or rather the Leidse Plaza. And you can also see a kind of confluence of flows, right? You have the tram tracks, you have a number of actually train tracks coming together here. There's car flows, there's pedestrian and bike flows. But they all kind of live together, and they actually all kind of exist in this shared space. And we're very much interested in the concept of the shared space in an urban design. So these soft edges between the different kind of modes of transport that just allow crossings, that allow a freedom of movement, that allows something which will just kind of leave the people the interpretation of space and how to move around it. And I think we've all kind of talked about it a little bit yesterday, and I think Michael will now pick up together with Roderick and with Sherry on some of those thoughts.
Thank you, Milena, and thank you for having us here. It's very exciting to be a part of this, representing kind of the local group within the team. I'd like to reiterate just how exciting it is to be a part of this group. And I think that you're going to see that as we go through. And we had the opportunity to spend a very powerful, I think, almost 24-hour period together to build a kind of chemistry and understanding. And I think what was very wonderful about that is I think about community, culture, democracy, that's a part of this brief. Very much was a part of our process. What I was amazed by is with all of this group, how democratic the whole process was. And I think that this gives you a little bit of a feel of when we start to look at this, how do we understand the location to bring this region into it? And by way of example, we just showed a small project that gets to that, which is a pedestrian bridge in Providence, Rhode Island, which was very much about connecting people from one place to another, but it also became about destination. And I think that was something that we felt was important in terms of placemaking. So the image to the right really gets at how do people move through places, how does it connect Fox Point, Brown University, College Hill, to say the Knowledge District, the street front, Dorrance Promenade, that would allow you to also have access to the riverfront. But the image on your left talks more about what it is in terms of a place, so how it's programmed, how it's put together, whether it's fishing piers, area for buskers, sunbathing, all of these types of things, and understanding what are the influences of that. And so we really wanted to evaluate what are the influences, just as a quick cursory view. And so from a programming standpoint, there's looking at how do we connect or bring in potentially Wayne State to the west, housing to the east, Tech Town to the north, right? And there's all of these sort of connectors, but how do we understand the environment of the cultural center itself? And what's fascinating about it is programmatically looking at cultural institutions, looking at educational institutions. There's kind of a woven tapestry that exists. They're not separate from one another. They already exist in kind of this dance with one another. And so how do we use that as a framework of potential? Another aspect was looking at green space. So this is cumulative and kind of giving a sense that there's a lot of green space to potentially work with within this. One of the things that was particularly interesting from even a cultural side was the amount of space between buildings. It was discussed often when we made our walk and time that was here. But also looking at it not only exterior spaces, but some of the internal spaces that feel like exterior spaces, right? So courtyards in CCS, the domed space in the right. We look at the courtyards, Kresge and Rivera within the DIA. But what's also interesting about this is what's accessible, what feels institutionalized, and what feels privatized. And so you see the dark green is really what feels more privatized. It doesn't feel like it's within the public realm. But we have sort of the lighter green that gives you a sort of sense of what is currently being activated. Where do people feel comfortable placing? It's a part of our public realm. So we see that as a potential to maybe take some of that back. Also, what was very fascinating is looking at, well, really Google. So you have kind of a global information network that if I'm coming as an outsider or a visitor, where is it telling me the main entrance to go to is? And so we look at what is the collaboration of that? How do people experience things, both virtually? And what was fascinating is when you look at that, 3 of the entrances don't even exist in kind of the global information network of systems. So how do people access things? But then the other side of it is to say all of these access points actually currently exist. Anybody can go at any time at, say, 10 o'clock this morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon and engage and walk in at any of these locations. So we see a tremendous, again, this kind of tapestry, this potential to be able to have access. These are all access points that these institutions feel comfortable with today because they already exist. I could walk into any of these doors. The other aspect that was interesting to look at is what is transit organization? What is where we really start the vehicular domain? And when we look at that, it's very powerful, right? There's the sort of streets, and they have a sense of strength, of power that's vehicular dominion, as well as the surface parking lots. And we look within that and say, how do we then look at what is the pedestrian domain? Where do we understand comfortable being? And what's fascinating about that is how controlled it really is. It's very specific about where you can or cannot be in terms of paved or surface area, sidewalk, plaza. But also what was fascinating within this is to look at what reinforces that. Edges, barriers, be it landscape walls, shrubs, plantings of collections of rose bushes that are very controlling in terms of where the public realm you can and cannot be. And so when we looked at that more and we overlaid this idea that the public art installation, right, and there was the 14 different sculptures that were identified, and you kind of look, where would people access and how would they go to these? And what you kind of get a sense is that those controlled conditions make a very specific route that people can get to. And I think what we saw within all of this is this incredible opportunity to say, with all of this woven tapestry of the institutions, the ability to have public space accessible, how do we liberate that? How do we democratize that? And a lot of it became so much about the potentials of what this can be. And I think we really wanted you to understand that this is a group that understands this problem and experienced this problem and really brings a kind of global perspective about how to solve it, but also understands very much locally what this place is about. And with that, I'd love Roderick to talk a little bit more about that liberation and particularly culture and democracy. So,
Thank you. It's great to be here. We're so excited to be part of this conversation. I wanted to show you a little bit of our work and things that we've learned in projects that might have some kind of overlap. The first project that I won't go into too much detail about, though, is the Hudson's project in downtown Detroit. So we're currently working on that project on Woodward. I think probably many of you are familiar with it. It's a project we're really kind of honored and humbled and very excited to be a part of. It also, I think, maybe informs my perception on Detroit as this really continuous city. And as I've been coming here over the last year quite a bit, I'm beginning to know Detroit more and more. I mean, it's a very amazing place. And so as I kind of peel the layers back and explore, I'm just more and more excited to spend time here. So the first project I just want to kind of briefly touch on is a master plan that we worked on with the Smithsonian. So this is the part of the Smithsonian that includes lots of stakeholders. It's the part of the Smithsonian where the castle is sort of the main part, but there's the Hirshhorn and the Freer. And so one of the reasons I show it is obviously I think it's all about connecting these different institutions. You know, the Hirshhorn has a very specific agenda in terms of what they do. The Freer has a very specific agenda in terms of what they do. So a lot of, and the other institutions throughout. And so a lot of what we did is tried to maintain their identity within the overall larger campus master plan, but create a unified kind of campus or landscape. I'm the landscape person on here. So my sort of excitement is the power for the landscape, and in this case, the garden, to create those connections to these institutions. As we were kind of putting these slides together, I wanted to show a little bit of a sketch of, you know, the first stages in this process, and that's what you're seeing on the screen behind me. I actually don't know who drew this sketch. Our process is completely overlapping. I don't know whose pen was whose in this bigger team that we, you know, were part of. And that's actually, of course, I'm kind of proud of that. That's why I'm showing you. I'm excited about that collaboration. That's just essential to what we do. Here's some kind of renderings of the sort of where the master plan has landed. It's still sort of ongoing. But also to bring up all the agencies that overlap here. This is a project that was initiated by the Smithsonian. One of the reasons it was initiated is to think about the Smithsonian and all these institutions. Another reason it was instigated is because the gallery spaces underneath are leaking. So there's always a little bit of layer of sort of pragmatic problem solving in what we're doing. I also want to show a project that we worked on in Hawaii. This is a plaza space that we created in Honolulu. It was formerly a parking lot. And I show the slides of the sort of various activity, yoga, art installation, movie night, ice skating rink in Hawaii, because we're very proud of not knowing sometimes what happens in our projects. So when we go there, I would have never proposed an ice skating rink in wintertime in Hawaii. That seems like completely crazy to me, to be honest. But when we go there, when we return to the site, and we see something that we didn't expect, to us that's success. So we're creating a framework, we're creating a provocation for people to fill it, and in this case, we feel really excited about how people filled it in. This process included a lot of conversation with the descendants in Hawaii, and in a way, they reclaimed ownership of this space. And that's what you're seeing in the slide behind me right now. That's, to me, the ideal outcome, is groups that have participated in the emergence of a project, then taking it over. Atelier 10 is also part of our team. They are not here today. They're also a team member from the Smithsonian Project. But I guess we wanted to show a couple of slides to just talk about basic ideas about sustainability. I think as landscape architects, issues of stormwater management, innovative approaches to those kinds of solutions are sort of best practice at this point. But I think what Atelier 10 bring to the table in sort of conversation with us and the larger team is actually pushing it to beyond this sort of best practice place. It's in some of the projects I'm working on right now, I guess the frontier is soil. It's like thinking about how do we install these landscapes and make them thrive. And it's all this sort of infrastructure, and I'll call soil infrastructure, it's all this kind of infrastructure that you don't see that makes success of a project, of a landscape. This, of course, is totally tied to management of it, to maintenance, to something that's really resilient. And that's a kind of infrastructure in and of itself. Also, as I've been coming here for quite a while, I know that there's another kind of layer to how people use public space in the winter than in the summer. So we need to be able to address what that difference is. You know, what are the markers during winter that maybe are not as occupied, but that really still kind of exist as presence on the site? And then kind of in the same vein, the idea of nighttime versus daytime. Those are two different kind of uses and spaces and gathering opportunities. So with that, I'm handing it over to Sherry.
Great, thanks. Hello, everybody. It's morning. I don't know if this is great for the cultural sector. We have to sort of gear ourselves up. I'm here with Future City, and we are, in the UK, what we call a cultural placemaking agency and a public art commissioning agency. And it was founded in 2007 by Mark Davey during a time that in London there was a lot of development that was going to happen, and the developers were also really responsible for managing and identifying what was going to happen in the public space. It was a time that the government sort of backed off and wanted to give it to the private sector. And so a lot of the work in the first sort of 8 years was really working directly with developers and architects and really understanding how to push the ambition of what it is they were going to create and how to create great spaces. And I've joined Mark in the last year with a lot of experience, 30 plus years, of actually working in the cultural sector, but also working at it from the perspective of understanding what it is that the civic and the cultural sectors want from this relationship. The thing that is important about our organization is that we don't just come up with the strategy, we also are the ones who deliver very often the commissions. So what this means is everything we put forward as concepts are things that we actually learn and are informed by what we've done. So we're constantly learning from mistakes and successes, and so the advice that we're giving is based on what we do. The other thing is there isn't one template. I know everybody has probably experienced the awful thing when you get a proposal and the cut and paste has not worked well, and you realize that what's been put forward to you is basically the template for someone else. Every single one of the cultural strategies is different, even what it looks like, the size of it, how big it is, what audience it's going to. Everything is considered for what you need, what it is we're supposed to be addressing. So a couple of quick examples of work in the past and giving some of the idea about what is of interest in Detroit. We worked on a project with Wembley Park, which is a huge arena, and it's on the outskirts of London. It's kind of out on its own. It had a lot of space around it. And Quintain actually came and said, you know what, we We want to be more ambitious. We want to think about how we draw people around and use the whole space. So the idea was putting together a strategy in which all of the outdoor areas started to create sub-neighborhoods of a cultural identity. They actually started to switch their branding, their main branding on their website, all of their communication, geared towards cultural activities. They've got to a point now where they feel good about it, but they feel like they need a little bit more assistance in starting to align with more of the cultural institutions. And so they've brought us back in to look at that. In Boston, we worked with the Massachusetts Council for the Arts and over 24 different cultural institutions. Boston is a city that suffers from the, oh, well, since New York is there, I might as well just not bother and forgive us. I guess it's not as good. I'm so sorry. And really what it was thinking about, actually, look at all the assets that you already have. Why are you not talking about this as a major, major part of the city? Why are you not thinking about when people come here, how they have a much larger opportunity? Why are you not connecting the conservatories and the schools as much with the institutions? Why are you not thinking together? And so that strategy is also developed into the Boston Foundation, taking on 2 roles to constantly work with the different institutions to up the ante. In Sydney, we did a similar thing in which Sydney also was like, oh, well, you know, I mean, we're Australia, nobody really comes here. I mean, I guess we're not great at arts, oh, I'm so sorry. And so really it was looking at how do you put all those cultural institutions together? How do you teach them that, yes, there are times where you have to have independent identity, but actually, when do you think about the right moments that you should be coming together and supporting one another? Because your audience doesn't care that you're a separate organizations. They just want a fabulous experience in their city. Me personally, I'm the person who came in and actually set up a vision and then the entire curation for the Times Square Arts program. And when I came in, I just want to let you know, most people think Times Square and it's going to have tons of money and everybody knows about you and what's the big deal. But I walked into a situation with a $40,000 budget for the year and an executive team that basically wanted to kill the program. And that's the point from which I started. I'm happy to say that now, even after I've left, they're still using the exact same vision, mission, criteria, the same framework that they were using from the beginning, and the work is as interesting and current and diverse as possible. But that's what we're looking for, a genuine way to say, like in New York, New Yorkers love to hate Times Square. The whole thing was saying, I'm sorry, but artists, you should seize it back. How does a cultural sector make a center of their city? How do they use it as a hub? And how do you highlight not just the individual artists, the institutions, and up an audience? When I went back to London, one of the first things I did before Future City was that I was approached to actually create, by another business improvement district, wanted an ambitious cultural program because of what had happened on Times Square. So I actually took all those learning lessons of the sort of framework and everything and applied it to London. So we created a cultural strategy that was also launched in a brand new station. We turned the entire station into basically a performance venue just to launch the cultural strategy. Because nobody wants something that is just a document that sits on the shelf. And so by doing that and thinking about how you not just give the theory, but you deliver on the first day, takes away the fear and really empowers people. So look, this is the image that you provided in your RFP. I just want to say, you know, like, this is your existing perception of yourself. But our walking around here, look, your perception has completely gone away. Yeah, there we go. So one of the things we want to do is come in and take a look at who do you think you already are right now? And then we want to start to look at what is it that you want to be? And where are you going to go with that? What do we want to set the vision for? What is the gap between that? What's the gap on this team about who we don't have to ensure that we're really relating to the diversity of this city? And then we'll think about it. As part of the consultation, look, a lot of people, I'm sure, in Detroit are suffering from consultation fatigue as much as there is other ways. We want to make sure that there are genuine engagements. Your cultural institutions, one of the things we want to think about is, how is that consultation also driven from an artistic starting point? Start an artistic action in the process of doing is when people open up and they talk and you can ask the softer questions and get the information. The project that I did with JR in New York gave so much information about who people were, how they saw themselves. The other day I was talking to Hank Willis Thomas. He's got this extraordinary project called 4 Freedoms and 50 states. And, you know, we were talking about a different city, but I said, you know, okay, so we're going up for this competition, you know. You have the possibility to take something like that and claim that Detroit should be the biggest and most important city for kicking off an action that is asking people how they view freedom. From all of that, we get soft information that is really great to tell us about how people aspire to see themselves. So the thing that's unusual about UNStudio is to actually bring someone like us in from the very beginning and actually talk to us in this very open way. What we want to do alongside the design is really set up a framework for you of cultural programming. We want to know that everything we're designing will be able to be delivered in this particular city for these purposes. So we leave you with something that will enable you to move on. We start this process of working together and really trying to create a mutual understanding. Most people start with all of the fears and the obstacles that hold them back. One of the things that we always love to do is start out with, list all your fantasies, all of your aspirations, then list all of your fears. Every single time I've done this, I'm very happy to say, the fantasies list is always longer. And everybody starts to realize that their fears are actually smaller. You start from that point, you can't do everything at once, but you start from where you naturally share objectives and understanding. And like I said, this has got to be something that has long-term sustainability. So like I said in Times Square, that framework is still working. It's now influenced not just that part of London, but the mayor's office has actually used it as an example for all bids. Wembley, as I said, they were so happy with it that they want to push the envelope. In Sydney, we're working in the largest redevelopment of a whole new precinct. In Boston, it's already spurred different institutions to put really ambitious commissions forward. So look, here in Detroit, what we really want to do is we want to listen to you, we want to work with you. We want to raise your aspirations to the forefront. We want to be able to work with you naturally, but we also want to make sure that it's exciting, because otherwise, what's the point? So what we want to do is keep it so that Detroit is an incredible place of the unexpected for the very long term.
So yesterday, when our team compiled the presentation for today, and the way we talked about the project, the initial thoughts that we had on what could we tell you and what do we want to withhold from you just to surprise you in a later stage, that brought us to the idea of concluding it with the way we want to promise you what we will bring and how we're going to behave to you and what we also ask of you, of course. We're a super team, we think, because we come from everywhere, let's say. We are very professional, very dedicated as architects, designers, and arts are. And we found that the companies fit very well with each other. We are still, let's say, the younger companies. We're very professional. 30 years might be quite a long time, but in architecture, you know, whenever you get older, you get better and more young. So that's especially for Milan, I like that. And we think... Absolutely not. And we think that with this team, we can really invite you to open up and talk about everything. We will listen very carefully. But of course, we will also come with strong statements and strong surprises, let's say, that might trigger the discussion just to get in a certain direction or a couple of directions in the beginning. We're super enthusiastic. We have a team in Amsterdam as well as in all the other places over here in America and London that is dedicated and is willing to start and eager to start, so we hope we can do that. We're professional in the sense that we solidify what we promise, we build, we construct, we organize, and we, of course, involve people. And we look at post-occupancy, so that means that everything that is part of this quest, including the budget and the schedule, is something that we're used to and that we can guard very, very carefully. We also have all means to make sure that we can get the community involved, that they get ourselves involved. We work with all the latest software programs. We do virtual reality, including acoustics, to make sure that we can actually simulate what we're trying to tell you. And that makes kind of a tool of discovery where everybody can have a feel of what the area and institutions might be in the coming 10, 20, 50 years. And of course, the involvement of the community in a literal sense. We notice, of course, the idea of the culture is extremely strong, but the community should be as strong as possible. So not only hard to reach, but very easy to reach, very accessible, with places that are not only in the institutions, but also outside of the institutions, and feel secure and feel like it's a space that is very human and very welcoming to get back to. We created a bridge in the 90s in Rotterdam. That was our first major project. We were very honored to be involved on that. When the bridge was constructed, the other side of the bridge was actually quite empty. And the development of that was dependent on the bridge, of course. And right now the bridge is part of the city, and it connects two sides of a very different kind of city than it was when we implemented that bridge. The surprising thing of the bridge, which we want to close our presentation with, was that the idea of that bridge as being an icon of the city seeped into the population and actually led to this result in which the bridge is actually tattooed on the back of one of the inhabitants of Rotterdam. So we hope with Detroit we can make the same kind of involvement, which we'll only know in a couple of decennia, we think. Thank you very much, and we are very ready for a Q&A session.
We begin with the Q&A, and then from there we will open it up to the audience. I will alert you when we are ready for that.
I think it would be a good idea that the jury introduces themselves before we ask any questions, so that's appropriate. So I'll start with myself. I opened the remarks before for those who are not just arrived a little bit later. I'm Salvador Salort. I am the director of the Detroit Institute of Arts.
Hi, I'm Rick Rogers. I'm president of the College for Creative Studies right across the street.
I'm Juanita Moore, I'm president of the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History.
I'm Julie Bargman. I have two heads, professor of landscape architecture and principal and founder of UNStudio.
I'm Maurice Cox. I'm the planning director for the city of Detroit.
Kara McCarty, curatorial director, Smithsonian, Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum.
Mario Moore, I'm a visual artist, born and raised in Detroit, but live in Brooklyn.
Hello folks, I'm Jonathan Massey, Dean and Professor at the A. Alfred Taubman College of Architecture and Urban Planning at the great University of Michigan.
Thank you. I'm William Gilchrist, Director of Planning and Building, City of Oakland, California.
All right, who's going to begin? Jonathan?
I appreciated your presentation a lot, and it was a great demonstration of high capacities and achievements across a broad range of activities. I was particularly wondering if you guys could say a little bit more about when you think about reimagining the future of American urban space, a theme you touched on a couple of times as a possibility for this location. Could you give us maybe some idea of what the attributes or characteristics of a future American urban space might be, accepting that you don't know everything yet. There's tons to discover, but I would imagine you have some idea what those attributes might be.
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, of course. What is, I think, a big advantage of ourselves, including Milena, that we come from another place. We didn't work that much yet in American cities. Of course, we know American cities very well from our studies and visits. So that means that we have a kind of fresh look on it. Of course, we don't know if a city as Detroit, in the area that we're looking at right now, with kind of a surplus of space, because that's how we almost feel it, like there's too much space in the profiles, in the way the buildings are distanced from each other, and the formality of it means that we have to do a really kind of a big introduction of a finer grain. Maybe that's the one thing that we can say, that this finer grain, if it's instated in this piece of city, or maybe in a large area of the city, with programming, with technology, interactivity, with, I just say something like living rooms where people feel more happy than if they're in a large open space, that might come to a development that can transform this area and the American city over a longer period of time. So it's not a one-off, it's a big gesture to conceive, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about among ourselves.
So I have a little bit of a historical narrative as an answer to that question, which is that I think increasingly we're seeing American cities' public spaces more and more valued. I mean, cities are really all across the United States, not just Detroit. You know, they're becoming more dense. The value of the city, the urban spaces are more and more valued. I think the lessons we've learned from the past are that public spaces need to be dynamic. They can't be static, that the form of those public spaces can't sort of trap the use of those spaces. So I don't know what that form looks like, but I know that at the High Line, there's a kind of surprising, let's say, sensuality to that promenade, to being kind of immersed in a kind of garden or wild sort of landscape. And I think that is, in a way, very unexpected in New York City. I think the same goes for something like Millennium Park, which does kind of connect some cultural institutions in downtown. I think these are kind of new precedents for the sort of way forward in terms of how we imagine public space in the American city.
I think too, one of the comments that Franz made was this idea of the urban living room, and it becomes very relational. So, and thinking not only about the American city, but what's the relevance to Detroit, and particularly this location, a kind of uniqueness to it because it's a cultural institution where people go for this idea of elevating themselves, of having this idea of democratic relational exchange. And to be in a space where people can freely communicate to one another and feel comfortable. So really being a space that's about people and has energy, because it's the type of space that effectively isn't about the objects that are there, but about creating the interactivity of the people who are within it. And I think that that resonates both with visitors and the residents alike.
Yeah. If I may, I'd like to pull a thread a bit on that answer. I enjoyed your comment, how you measure success by the improvisational use of an open space, something you were not expecting. And I agree, that's a very strong indicator that you got it right. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from you all at the other end of the spectrum, and I think you were hitting on it a bit with your work in Times Square in particular. How do you engage community at the front end, of really understanding the program, the nature, the character of the space for what you should expect, and again, through that valued process, provide the framework for the unexpected to be able to thrive as well. But without getting too much in the weeds, because I know we're time constrained, but I really would like to get a better sense of that engagement process that lets you know how to inform the design outcome.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, there's not just one answer. So a lot of this does come from working with the stakeholders and having a more sincere understanding of what's already happened, where you feel the gaps are, and how it should happen. I think, one huge part that ties to the other question is also that, what is a great American space? equal opportunity, right? That everybody should feel that they have access to that, they potentially can be there and things can happen. And I think one of the things in identifying the gaps is how you get into the networks and the creative networks, but also the community networks of who isn't represented and how you bring in. The hard thing is not to make assumptions about what you think people want or don't want and program just to try and attract. You have to go out and try and seek that. Some of it is from hard consultation and some of it, like I say, is soft. By providing a diverse range of program first, you start to see who responds to it. In Times Square, every single project that I did was actually a test. The only way I was surprised I got the job because I said, look, what I want to do is turn this into an experimental test bed. You already have an audience. I want to test things. So every single project was a test on, could this work? Would this time work? Who would be our audience? Who would want to participate? What artists we would get? One of the things that I think is really crucial is not just working with the cultural institutions, but identifying a network of the creatives at the lower level who are actually creating work, because we need to design for what we don't know yet. Artists are always ahead of us, right? But so often what we do is we look at cultural institutions that have already finished, which means you're 20 years behind the time. So, you need to get out to who's creating and understanding, because they're also reflecting the questions, of society. And you have to make sure that you're getting enough of a cross-section of different perspectives. The Polish community is going to have a slightly different perspective possibly than the Bangladeshi community, but maybe not. We shouldn't be assuming that just based on that. So that's why, one of the things we were talking about is really suggesting how in the process we can hit a couple of artistic interventions that just start to tease these factors out and how you gather that. Because if it's not used sincerely and someone isn't going to want to take it over, and if they're not fighting to get time to be there, then it's not a success.
But, I do think, to be even a little bit specific about it, I know, and I think we know, and we've talked about this from experience, that asking the community to come to us and having Post-it notes is not working. It is us going into the community and engaging so the key though is figuring out how to get in there, like and as Sherry mentioned, but it's not just holding public meetings and expecting representation from people who are busy doing things on Tuesday night. It's us meeting people in where they are.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I think you touched on a number of the challenges, but one of the things that I didn't hear, and maybe you could speak a little bit about, is how you would actually engage all these institutions on the site, because it's not just the Detroit Institute of Art and the library. There's a whole collection of great institutions, universities here, who are also key stakeholders in this process, and then they have their stakeholders. So it's actually a very challenging situation. I'm just wondering if you could give us a little insight of how you might engage all the various stakeholders, and also think about how, because I'm sure they all would love to have some of the audiences go into the institutions as well.
I think my most relevant experience with that is working with the Smithsonian and that master plan. And I think it starts from, obviously meeting with people, but I think the premise is that this connection allows more than the sum of its parts, that this idea of campus expands their presence as well. But at the same time, kind of ensuring that they've retained their identity. So that's kind of the starting point. And it is finessing. It's allowing people to be heard, to make sure that they are, as valuable as the other institutions, that we need them to participate in this kind of campus building. It's a complicated sort of overlap of how all these people play together, right? But I think that all the people running these institutions they need this. You know, that's my perception. They need to have these connections be made without lots of signage that's turned around or fallen over. And, you know, they need that connection to be intuitive, that people are actually have the opportunity to wander and discover all of a sudden a new institution that they weren't expecting to spend time with.
As we know, a lot of the challenges is, I mean, a lot of these have fortified facades, and so it's that threshold which is one of the biggest challenges, is how to get, have a lot of people outside, but how to get them actually inside the buildings. Right?
What struck us in the visit was that the institutions are well identified. It's a patchwork of institutions, not accessible really, a couple of them only. So what we discussed yesterday, I mean, we come from the Netherlands, in which we work with the public constantly, with everybody involved, with all the stakeholders. We have an understanding that's called polderen, which means that we keep on talking until we get to an understanding. Sometimes it gets to a compromise which is not as strong as the original idea, so we have to be careful with that, hence we need a strong team on that. I think the way of dealing with each other is to recognize each other's identity and involvement that is different for any institution, and from that point on try to gather kind of common sense of how we want to open up the institutions. And I think the institutions all fit quite well with each other. It's education and culture, and it's community. So there is something very similar that we can use from the start, of course. So we're actually surprised that it didn't happen really yet. So we're very happy to help out.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you phrased the question in terms of the facades facing the space, because one of the things that we also thought about very much is, well, how do we make the entire grounds very porous? That it's not about just the outside space and the inside space, but thinking about how to really weave the entire flow and movement of people and the use of space also through the buildings. So maybe that is something that might vouch for a certain kind of, maybe a rethinking of how the internal space of buildings is also being used, so that it becomes just kind of one, that it's not about walking around the building or facing a facade, but you can kind of walk through the building as a part of that experience, and that one place, and then you're able to kind of weave through further through another building. We walked through the library on our way over to the Institute of Arts, and we very much like that experience, that you can kind of traverse the campus in just a number of different ways, which again speaks to that freedom and the choice of movement and making it a little bit informal, actually.
I mean, we also talked about the entire area being the plaza, and actually everybody was part of the plaza, as opposed to the plaza just being an absence in the middle. In part of your brief, it also talks about the DIA being the center. So in a way, if that's, if people use this idea of a great symmetrical plaza, and DIA is the fountain in the middle, there's still all those restaurants and provisions and everything. Everybody has a part and everybody has a role in it. And how do you get them to gather? And how do you understand that it's all one space and everybody is going to benefit? Yes, we all know that people have challenges with funding and everything, but how do you start to identify what it is you all need and want, and understand if you put that money together, what you could achieve would be so much greater than if you all try and do it separately.
I think too, maybe just to respond a little bit to the side of how do you get all these things to work together, and I think this is a group that's been very interested right away, and I hope the chemistry comes across between it, that's very interested in building relationships, in learning, in knowing more, and pushing. And you're going to find that with this particular group, and I think that they're very comfortable with this being said, that it's one that's going to challenge, that is going to push back, that's going to say, what is possible? And we think that that's a really healthy dialogue, and can bring kind of that coalition of all of these different institutions together by asking difficult questions and challenging different proposals.
I'd like to pick up on a few themes that you've highlighted, and these are, I think, your words. We've got some great backdrops, and too much space, and no people. right? It's as simple as that. And yet, there are tens of thousands of people who visit these institutions throughout the course of a month or a year, and they go into buildings, they do their things, and then they leave. So trying to understand how you're going to create places that people linger, because there's really nothing out there. There are beautiful buildings that are backdrops, but there's no reason to stay in public space. So I really want to get from the conceptual level to like, how do you get people to linger in public space and not just use the buildings as backdrops, but there has to be something that's not there currently that has to be brought forward. And I'm not understanding yet what you would add to the sauce that would make thousands of people want to hang out in public space.
Yeah, of course we don't know that yet, but we have some ideas. What I said in the question that we started out with, the finer grain, I think that's a very important kind of thought, conceptual approach to keep in mind. That means layering the area, and layering means maybe from very large kind of bold statement to smaller statement to institutions to something that is accessible, to flowing out over public space and to reorganizing maybe mobility even, to create a more comfortable and accessible space. And by behavior of people, by seeing if we can, with initiatives, create kind of an understanding of what people are looking for over there. Because we cannot invent that just like that. We can propose, but we need to test it, and we need to discuss it, and we need to know what kind of groups are we talking about, what is comfortable. Do we want large events over there, or do we want a lot of small events throughout all of the seasons, or do we concentrate on certain kind of peak seasons? So that's something I think that our team is very eager to research and put on paper and discuss with you. Yes. I don't know if it answered your question, but...
I think some of it too is, we were talking about this yesterday, how ambitious do you want to be? Great. Because there are all sorts of ways of reconsidering the physical barriers that there are, the social barriers and the economic barriers that are going on. So one, you've got a lot of gates, you've got a lot of roads and stuff. The ability to rethink it. What you really want is you want people in a few years to say, oh my God, I didn't realize that was a whole area. I didn't realize that I didn't realize how many things there were. I didn't realize that was right around the corner. The thing is you've got all these great assets, but they're all facing in different directions. People don't necessarily know that they might want to go from one place to another. I mean, we're fortunate enough that we got a list of places, so we walked through them, and we discovered all these incredible murals in the library and various things. But people don't necessarily know that, because they don't know this is an area where you could go. So again, like when we were talking about the car is important, but maybe the car doesn't have to be everywhere as far as being in, maybe it's one central place, and the way that people park forces them to go to other places. We're talking about the really, really tough winters that you have. How do you entice people during the winter to walk from one place to another? So we've got to think about that. Some layers are going to be like fabulous design. Some of it's going to be you need to just completely rethink your roads, your pathways, your entrances, and what that can be so it reads as one space. And another element is what is going to be the programming, or what are going to be those punctuations or possible other public art elements that are going to come in and be needed to fill out what you already have, but to tease people. I mean, that's what you need, right? So it's hard because we can't show you the great designs and concepts and tell you that is necessarily what it's going to be, because we want to be tied into the community a little more to know what those aspirations are, and hopefully to tie in some of the local talent. I mean, for example, on a very, very small scale, Future City, whenever we work in a city outside of London, we always hire somebody in that city as our main point of contact who fills out something we don't have. So we want to do that and create it. But yeah, we want to give you a part of Detroit that no one even realized was one huge section that they might have been missing out on.
There are actually some pretty clear problems with what we walked around in yesterday. And so I'm not proposing a solution. and they've never heard me say what I'm about to say, but it's pretty clear that the space needs to be defined, right? It's not defined. It's basically vast, and it has barriers sort of at every turn. So bringing some definition, bringing some clarity is almost like pretty obvious that would be the answer, but that's what that's the solution in my mind. The solution is that it can't be just this vast. It has to have actually maybe smaller spaces that function as destinations within this larger network of a master plan. So, I mean, and then is there shelter there at all? Even kind of perceived shelter? Not really. I mean, I don't know where to go. There are actually some pretty nice tree specimens there, but I still don't see that you're being invited to spend time underneath them, for example. So in a way, there's a diagram that's pretty straightforward that in a way describes the problem that I feel like is the starting point.
I just wanted to ask, you kind of touched on it briefly about how the spaces that you create are kind of taken over or they take a life on its own, and you had a great question, but I wanted to know like very specific examples for some of the projects that you did where the initial beginning with the community might have been maybe conflicting, or it was rigorous, or there was a challenge, and what were those specific examples, and how did you move forward from those, projects?
Where to start? Did you want to talk about first, Milena? Did you want to talk about the examples that you had posted about where people were reappropriating the space and understand what that was first and what that went to? And then I can jump in with some.
To give an example of a process that we do usually with our projects, and especially with projects that have kind of a private-public component in it, and most of projects are, especially in our role as architect. What we usually do is to go through involvement workshops, kickoffs, thematic, so everybody can get kind of a say and respond on topics that we want to introduce. If there is a discourse that is going beyond what we're coming from, of course we have to get the stakeholders together that are co-responsible with us for that. So it's of course not only the design team that has to take care of that, but the stakeholders, the client, maybe the government or local authorities. And with that, try to solve kind of differences of opinion. My experience is that there is always a lot of noise on every project, how small it is. That doesn't really matter what kind of scale it is. But we as architects, designers, we always can figure out how to solve it because we got kind of an open view to it. We're working conceptually, so we can turn around that concept if the concept is strong enough for that. So in my experience, there is never a point in which we have to say goodbye to each other and part in difference of opinion. I
sort of have a follow-up question for everyone on this panel, which is, have you ever had a project that looks exactly like the first drawing you presented? I don't think that's not the process that this team, we're not, we're done when we present it to you. It's always a process of, feedback and evolution and the influences of outsiders and so in a way like that's, we celebrate that process, and it's a surprising process sometimes because you didn't know that some stakeholder was expecting something.
So I understand that, but I want something
Yeah.
very specific. Like
Okay.
Just yes.
All right. Was working with a local authority in the UK, and as part of redevelopment, they had a community center. Now, the community was represented by 7 women who were over the age of 70, who had no interest in any young people or anyone else using the community center because of what it is they wanted to either do, or it was disruptive, or it was disgusting, or it didn't fit with what they want. And they showed up to everything, and they were loud, and they were vocal, and nobody in the community wanted to step forward because no one wants to mess with the big matriarchy. You just don't, right? So, we thought, okay, well, you know, we have to do something, and we have to understand who is missing. So we worked with the council to identify the groups that weren't represented, and then we had artists in residence. And so one thing, this is a little while ago, everybody, so bear with me, but at that time, the diary room was really popular. And so she went into the estate, and she lived actually on the estate for a while. And she created a diary room where she asked people to come in and just talk about the estate and what did they want, what did they miss, what did they like, all of this. We put this all together, and we held an event of a screening of the diary rooms, right? Because you didn't have Facebook and stuff then. So anyway, we had everybody gather, and so many people came because they were involved, and so they brought their families, and all of a sudden, the community was represented watching what all of these comments were. There was so much sense of popularity from it that we asked at that event about who would want to be on the community board, and we gave them a profile of what we thought was ideal. All of these people who were involved and felt that their voices were heard signed up to be on the community board, and all of a sudden the community board went from 7 people who were over the age of 70, of having 15 people who went from the age of 15 to 70. And then it was a community board that was going to reflect a use of the community center that was more appropriate. So that's a tiny example, but a way of looking at it. And that's one of the great things about working with universities and cultural institutions, is already that willingness to think about a creative-led solution where people can get in there and really involve people. And then you've got to, the other thing is, if you're going to invite people into your living room, you need to take care of them. So the other thing is, if you're going to ask for consultation, you need to tell them how you're going to feed it back. And if you're going to ask them to be involved in an event, it ought to be something that they want to talk about in the future, and they want to tell their friends, and they want to be proud of. So it's not just enough to engage. You've got to engage in something that you want, that shows respect, and that you want some pride behind, so that everybody knows if they get involved, they know what is going to happen next and how they can actually make a difference. And, you know, it's crucial.
We're entering in about the 30-minute mark here. We really do need to open up to the audience here. We have a time for about maybe one question. Is there anyone interested in coming up and asking?
Really more of a statement as to what. It's really more of a statement as to what are the boundaries. You do have those original boundaries in that map, you know, showing between CAS and past CCS and all that. But I think that, and you also mentioned what's the future. And I really think that the future boundaries, and you do believe of eventually trying to see them, really is much larger than what we think of here now. So on Wayne State's situation, they have envisioned an expansion of their arts that take place along Cass, and they are breaking ground for the Hillberry project that takes them 4 or 5 blocks south to Canfield. We're building a major performing arts center, 3-4 theaters and all that plus. And the end of their arts, it goes across the Ford Expressway, where they're going to be building a art gallery museum. But you also have Tech Town, and you also have CCS over there. And there's movement for big money to create a much larger arts technology center that all of this will be part of, and even going east into Milwaukee Junction. So I think that might be some thinking and getting from your stakeholders, how big is your vision going to be? Because you showed only a couple blocks of along Cass for Wayne State, and they have bigger visions. So that's what I'm saying, because generally we think of the art area being with Midtown. But I think a large part of these other things that are developing with Ford Hospital, Tech Down, and so on, might be where the future is.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and I think appreciate that comment very much in the sense that what we tried to do was work within the boundaries that were within the brief, but the acknowledgement that absolutely Tech Town to the north all the way to the CBD and the riverfront. The connection to Wayne State, we actually talked about in the wintertime, the fact that Wayne State, that's when their students are actually present. So here's the dynamic, who's the group to sort of pull from within is critical to that. So we see it, there's kind of the tapestry that's the sort of, the boundary within, but it's very much about the ambition of connecting the entire region. And it's beyond only the city of Detroit, right? That it has a ripple effect that has the ability to affect its cultural district, and it becomes the destination and place, but it is about Midtown, then the city of Detroit, then the metropolitan region, the Tri-County area, representative of the whole state. And I think the goal, as we understand it in the brief, is that this is a global implication, that the DIA understands itself as globally important, and this entire panel recognizes it as such, and that it would be important to tie all of these things together to recognize that global importance. So I think to your comment, it's absolutely, and why it's so important and these stakeholders are here as a part of this team, is because they have the experience and the ability to pull that network into it. And a process that's, I think, going to be absolutely amazing to consider. It kind of gets into where we wanted to sum up, but it's a big reason why I'm so excited to be a part of this team.
Well, we're at the final 10 minutes. You are more than welcome to make final remarks, or if you'd like to take another question from the jury.
All right, so one of the things we thought about was, what do you really want to know? And ultimately one of the questions, especially with a bunch of people who've flown across waters and such, why do you want to be here? Why do you want this project? Why is this project important to you? So we thought we would share, each of us, why we feel that this project is important. As an agency, as Future City, I mean, Detroit is known all over the world. It is a very, very important name, identity, and brand. Who doesn't want to be a part of that? 2, you are a gateway into the United States. You have so many people crossing that border and coming into the US. So Detroit has the ability to really introduce people to the ambition of what is a great American cultural experience. On a personal note, I grew up, I mean, though I'm fortunate enough to live in London, I work internationally now, I mean, I grew up in subsidized housing. My father worked in an insurance company. My mother had to take a different job every year as a secretary because, there was no childcare. But I was fortunate enough that my father chose to put us in Middletown, Connecticut, which had Wesleyan University. And there, because of the university and its arts program, and such a strong world music program, I was introduced to aspects and escape into worlds that I could create and I could re-envision myself. And from that point forward, I've always worked professionally since I was 16 in the arts, because I believe that they allow people, anyone, to really be able to reimagine who they are now and where they are or where they could be. So the combination of being able to do that and do that here in Detroit means a lot to our firm, but also to me personally.
My answer's a little more concise. I want to be here, but I also want to say my office, it's a group of people. I think we want to be here because we think we have something to contribute to this conversation. I think we have the enthusiasm and curiosity to be part of this conversation and to, provoke and listen simultaneously somehow. So that's why we want to be here.
I think when we've talked about our practice, we've always seen it very much as a global practice, but that's located in Detroit. And those of you who we do know well understand that we talk about it in that way. This particular project, I look at the team that was put together and how it was set up. was fascinating to us. I asked this question to Franz and Milena in particular when they were putting this together. They had the opportunity to choose a number of different competitions, and I'll let them answer their question as to why. But what was intriguing to me is that this was a team, and looking at who we would team with, that had that global implication, that had that ability to understand things at a range beyond this. And as a transplant from Los Angeles to Michigan to the Carolinas and back to Michigan, I chose for this to be home. To work in a place where now you have the opportunity to work globally with a global implication, but it's your home, is pretty cool. And we have a whole group right there, about 20 of us from our office who are here that are saying it's equally important. And it is a representation of the 30 or so people that are here. There's probably 10 different countries that are represented of people who have also chosen this to be home, from Nigeria to Lebanon to China to Albania to Poland. They've come from all over the world to be here, and we want to give them the opportunity to be a part of this competition.
How to top that? Yeah, I think we all try to kind of relate our office's aspirations, but also our personal ones. I think Franz and I have spoken extensively about our desire to work in the States, and yeah, to be a part of an ambition and a transformation that seems to be within our brief and within what you want. But at the same time, my educational background is also in the Midwest. I'm somehow very tied to this entire area, even though I live now in Amsterdam, and that's where I developed professionally, but sort of my roots in architecture are here, and that kind of brings me to a desire to kind of experiment with what is specific to the Midwest, and now what is specific to Detroit, and I'm very excited to just enter a dialogue with the residents of Detroit and with the different institutions, and yeah, really understand how to kind of do this together. I guess that's my personal.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we are extremely excited to be over here, and we thought after we scan a lot of kind of invitations and opportunities that are going on around the world, and of course also here in the United States, and we're looking really for opportunities where we can learn a lot of the place where we are. And we think the kind of open brief that you gave us to think about this area, and also without really bordering it. I mean, there is a map inside, but of course we all know that we have to look much further than that. And the seeping through all the layers of, let's say, society makes it so interesting to be part of this quest of trying to provide a solution with you for this area and come up with something that makes kind of a unique statement and an area within Detroit and maybe within America and the wider world. So we're definitely looking forward to that. And most of all, once we chose to do it and we collected the disciplines and the persons and the companies with who to do it, we found out, of course, that the most important thing also with the client is to have a good relationship, long-term relationship, and have as much fun as possible, and that's what we're aiming for.
So this is the end of the final remarks. I would like to remind all of you to please share your opinions with us on the comment cards. You can leave them outside of the lecture hall at the front table. We're going to take a 30-minute break, and we'll be back here at 11 o'clock. But if you could please thank Franz, Milena, Michael, Roderick, and Sherry for their lovely presentation. And Sarah.